Hello, welcome to Story Jerk. My name is Sam, and today in Writer's Digest I'll be regaling to you all the storytelling nuggets I gleaned from my month's worth of media consumption. And let me tell you, what a month it's been. I got a big fat tax bill, I got my car impounded, and I already tried to make this video once before. This f***ing rain is atrocious. This month I've been learning about how to make characters likeable, or rather, how to avoid making them unlikable. The 4 things that stand out for me this month have been Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, Citizen Ruth, Robot Dreams, and The Society of the Snow. That one was recommended from a viewer of this channel, so thanks very much. So Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris is like one of those family-friendly Saturday afternoon matinees. It's all feel good and there's a happy ending. The story is about like a 1950s down-and-out widowed washerwoman who wants to get a dress from Dior in Paris so to make her feel good. So she goes all the way there and has wonderful adventures and meets people along the way. I hate this movie. I just could not get behind the main character for 2 reasons. The first is that I don't believe it when stories try to get you to feel a certain way about a character by virtue of all the other characters telling you how you're supposed to feel about her. Mrs. Harris just kind of flutters through life, and everyone she meets is like, oh my god, you're so whimsical and charming and funny, and she's not. She has this like jittery, nervous energy about her. I guess for some it's like endearing. For me, it's like a irritating pity, kind of like Chihuahua with PTSD. Like, I don't want to pet it, I just want to punt it into frozen lake. The other reason I just can't get behind her is that she never seems to kind of suffer the consequences of her actions. In the first act, we see how she's downtrodden and everyone kind of takes advantage of her, blah, blah, oh. The filmmakers seem to think her life is worse than Oliver Twist or something. She gets this idea in her head that she's going to finally do something nice for herself and to get this dress from France, and when she's at the dog track, she interprets the name of a dog as a sign that she's going to win the money and go there and blah, blah, blah. She puts down the money. Surprisingly, she loses it all and it's boo-hoo, boo-hoo, right? And you know, she kind of looks like she's going to be like Michael Douglas and falling down. Like she's on the edge, she's about to snap. But in the end, one of her friends works at the dog races and pulls some strings or whatever, and she just gets her money back at plus more. Well, what was the point of that? She finally gets this dress, takes it back to London, but when a kind of up-and-coming snooty actress needs a dress for a dance, Mrs. Harris gives the dress to this actress who ends up ruining the dress to begin with, right? Now, in the book it's based on, this is supposed to be a point where Mrs. Harris, this fortifies her because she realises the dress wasn't the thing, it was the adventure, right?
The real dress were the memories we had along the way.
In the film, word gets back to Paris that her dress was ruined, and they just basically express ship a brand new dress, so there we are, no more consequences. So you have a pitiful character that everyone else tries to convince you is just like amazing, rarely shows any initiative or any forthright overcoming an obstacle, never suffers any consequences, and yet she doesn't even seem to appreciate it. So the whole thing, big thumbs down for me, don't recommend. I touched on Alexander Payne in my last Writer's Digest. I'm a big fan, but I hadn't seen Citizen Ruth. And it is a black comedy satire where an irresponsible pregnant woman finds herself caught in the middle of a nationwide abortion scandal. And Ruth is perfectly played by Laura Dern. Laura Dern nails the physicality, she nails the offbeat humour, she nails the one-liners.
Suck the shit out of my ass, you fucker!
And the interesting thing is, on paper, Ruth is a terrible person, right? She's almost completely unlikable. Now, I'm a big fan of characters who are like bad people, right? If you've seen Young Adult written by Diablo Cody or Patrick Bateman, for example, she is a drug addict, she's a loser, she has kids and she abandons them and she's irresponsible, blah, 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 blah. But how the script actually gets you to root for her is really interesting. Firstly, when we're introduced to her in this like squat, she gets pumped and dumped by a crappy boyfriend. So immediately, it's like a reverse of the save the cat logic. If you see a character save a cat or do something nice for someone, you immediately like them, right? This is kind of the opposite, where she is unfairly treated by someone worse than her. So we don't quite pity her, but you know, you end up kind of rooting for her, just enough for that first minute of the story. Then when she returns home, her family tell her to get lost because she's abandoned her kids, who they've now adopted, and the kids, it'd be bad for them if suddenly she's back in her life because they're not going to have any stability. And there's a moment where Ruth looks through the window and sees that the kids are doing better without her and walks away. So even though we, at the start of it, were like,
she's a terrible mother,
this moment makes us go, you know what, there is something to her. Because her judgment is done internally by herself, without any other interference, right? The kids don't know she's by the window, no one's persuading her in that moment. And they say how you act in private is really who you are. Now, when you compare that to the other characters in the film, it really creates a stark contrast. So you have the pro-life Christians who are right-wingers, and then you have the kind of pro-choice, liberal, snooty people, blah, 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 blah.
You know you're not supposed to be drinking.
What, for my baby? You don't give a fuck about my baby. You want me to kill my baby.
The pro-choicers aren't as ridiculed up front. However, by the end of it, you get to see they are as self-serving. And this is perfectly encapsulated in the final shot when Ruth gets the money and escapes and walks past the media circus, having managed to escape without her being noticed. And she sails off into the sunset, having learnt a little bit. Super underrated movie. I can imagine why it's not so well known in people's minds, because the poster is just like, what is this poster? She's an egg because she's pregnant. The third thing I watched was Robot Dreams, which is a dialogue-free animation, feature length, about a lonely dog who builds a robot friend and their trials and tribulations when they get separated. It's basically an allegory for a breakup. Goes through that cycle of the pain of a breakup, but also when a breakup is good and the healing side of it. The dog, when you're introduced, he's just lonely, right? He lives alone in his apartment, he eats microwavable food, he rewatches the same shows, and he sees the neighbours have a partner and he's kind of jealous. I don't believe loneliness is like an actual dramatic way to become invested in a character. You know when you watch those like charity videos and it will have like some kid or sad dog and it's sad music? Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm one of those people where the moment I sense someone's trying to sell me something, I instantly kind of push away, even if deep down it might be something on paper I actually agree with. The problem with having a character that doesn't have a kind of real stated problem just kind of means you end up going back to the same well when it comes to looking for things to happen in the second act. Like when the dog goes on a skiing holiday because he thinks he can make a friend, or when the robot who's stranded on the beach befriends some like birds temporarily. But I have to be honest, it completely won me over in the final moments. I think ultimately, if a film nails it by the end, you can forgive all. Now, from feel-good animation to just harrowing experience, we have The Society of Snow. Holy shit. Now, I don't mean it's a bad movie. It's in fact an excellent movie. But my goodness, this is tough going. It is based on the true story of the Chilean rugby team whose plane crash lands in the Andes and they must survive against the elements. If you remember this story, or you've heard of this story, maybe you saw the film that was made of it in the 90s called Alive. Basically, they have to resort to eating dead bodies to survive. Now, being an adaptation of a true story, there's not much in the way of fiction when it comes to inventing characters or squishing characters or kind of coming up with contrived kind of moments. My understanding is in the 90s version with Ethan Hawke, there's that Hollywood stuff of them like almost falling off mountains. So it's a real testament to the storytellers that not only were they able to find an emotional through line in what is ultimately an absolutely horrendous ordeal where who lives and dies just feels like capriciousness. They did very well to actually keep the plot moving forward. The storytellers have to rely on whatever plot devices are there in the first act. There's the different luggage cases, there's the broken radio, and it's so resourceful. And obviously, you know, the advantage is this is what they had to do in that moment to survive. So props on them. Thanks, guys. Great story. It really showed me just how much drama you can get out of A, nature. This fucking rain is atrocious. But also B, having limited resources. Often in storytelling, we think the more devices or more toys I can give my characters, the kind of more fodder I'll have to do certain things or to overcome problems. I think this film proves the complete opposite, that the fewer elements you have externally, the more you can do with it. If you want a movie that's going to make you appreciate what you have, you want to check out Society of Snow. If you have any suggestions for stories to watch or read or play, let me know in the comments and maybe I'll cover it next month's Writer's Digest. Thanks very much for watching. Consider subscribing, blah, 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 and take care.